remind everyone that the meeting is going to be recorded. I think that little noise just indicated that. And I'm asking everyone to, if you'd please mute your microphones when you're not speaking. That way we won't get the feedback and some interferences and background noise and all that. That would help a lot. And I'd also like to remind you that when you do speak, that you state your name beforehand. That way Ms. Taylor can get that information for the purposes of the minutes, and it'll be included in the recording as well, so we know who's speaking. So with that, I'd like to ask Ms. Taylor to take the roll call to confirm that there's a quorum presence, and that way we can all test our mics as well. All right, Ms. Taylor.
Okay, I'm going to start with the roll now. Randall Beatty.
Here.
Maureen Buttrell. Dr. Corrado. Dr.
Here.
Cotton.
Here.
Dr. Edinburgh. Okay, he might not be back yet. Director Jackson. Dr.
Here.
Maha.
Here.
Rich Myers.
Here.
Kristen Schelling.
Here.
Travis Spender. He's not going to be here for the meeting today. Jamie St. Clair.
Here.
Kenneth Zersey.
Here.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry, this is Les Edinburgh. I was finally able to join by phone only. For some reason, the video kept kicking me out.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, so our first order of business will be the adoption of the agenda for the meeting. You should have received this, the agenda in the draft agenda from Ms. Taylor in an email. I ask for a motion to adopt the draft agenda, and please remind you to state your name before making this and seconding the motion.
Mr. Chairman, this is Les. We received some documents for review for the toxicology subcommittee. I don't know if that needed to be covered in this meeting, or was it for a future meeting? If it's meant to be covered in this meeting, it needs to be added to the agenda.
So we have, as far as I understand, we had sent the documents out, and the members of the subcommittee felt there was no need to have a meeting to make any.
To have a subcommittee meeting that I
correct.
think, because right, but I think we should address just a couple items. I don't think we need an entire meeting.
Okay, so that is the discussion for that is, if I'm correct, Katya, is under the toxicology program update.
Yes, this is Katya. Jim Hutchings is going to reference, I think one of his slides has those two fentanyl derivative methods on there. So he's going to speak about it, and the committee can discuss it at that point.
Yeah,
perfect.
Okay.
I do have two changes to the agenda. If this is the right time to say them, they're not significant, but the order, Jim Hutchings for the toxicology will actually present first in that group of presentations, and he is kind of switching places with Alka Lohman, who will be doing the overall DPS update.
Okay.
And, Brad Jenkins had a family emergency this morning, and so Alka Lohman will be presenting his information.
Alrighty, so can I have a motion to adopt the draft agenda with those two changes? And again, please state your name before making and seconding the motion.
Kristen Schelling. I'll move to accept the amended agenda.
And Zersey, second.
Alrighty, Ms. Taylor, can you please roll call to record the votes?
Okay. Mr. Beatty,
Here.
Dr. Corrado,
Yes.
Dr. Cotton,
Yes.
Dr. Edinburgh,
Yes.
Director Jackson,
Yes.
Dr. Maha,
Yes.
Mr. Myers,
Yes.
Ms. Shelley,
Yes.
Ms. St. Clair,
Yes.
Mr. Zersi.
Yes.
The motion passes.
All right, thank you, Ms. Taylor. The next item on the agenda is to approve the draft minutes. And we received an email, I believe yesterday, with the correct minutes attached. So hopefully you've all had a chance to review those minutes. And I ask for, are there any proposed changes to the minutes as people read them?
This is Les. Move to accept.
All right, is there a second to that motion?
This is Kathy will accept it.
Alrighty, Ms. Taylor, can you please take a roll call?
Okay, before I start the roll for the
Oh.
minutes, I just want to make sure, Mr. Beatty, you accept the adoption of the agenda?
Yes.
You accept the adoption of the minutes?
Yes.
Dr. Corrado,
Yes.
Dr. Cotton,
Yes.
Dr. Edinburgh,
Yes.
Director Jackson,
Yes.
Dr. Maha,
Yes.
Mr. Myers,
Yes.
Ms. Shelley,
Yes.
Ms. St. Clair,
Yes.
Mr. Zersi.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Taylor. The next item is the chair's reports, and I have no chair's report for today. So let's move right into Director Jackson's director's reports.
All right, let me share my screen. All right. Hopefully you can see my screen at this point. If someone can, okay, I think I heard it good. Okay, so I just wanted to give a brief update of some department level things to you since it's been an interesting 2020, as we all know. So just in case you need the materials, they are located on our website. The presentation is available as a PDF, and it is, this slide gives you that information of where to find it. It's on the Scientific Advisory Committee page, meetings and meeting minutes. All right, so the Department of Labor and Industry in Virginia, Virginia was the first state to put in place regulations for workplaces to ensure the safety of workers. And they put forward these emergency temporary regulations, and those went into effect at the end of August. Businesses, and including state agencies, had until the end of September to put all of the elements of the regulations into place. And it did include putting forward an overall policy and coming up with an infectious disease plan if you thought you had any of the higher risk work activities within your agency or business. So the way they were defined, DFS does have some medium risk job functions. And so we decided to treat everyone who works at DFS as a medium risk person. And so we wrote our policies in that way. So all folks have reviewed the policies and had the required trainings in the appropriate time period. So that has that was an extra bit of fun for those of us in Virginia. The Central Laboratory Capital Project is moving forward, and we are very excited as we are getting more information about what the building is going to look like and working through the capital project. So we've completed a couple of the design phases. Initially, there was the conceptual design where it's just sort of loosey-goosey. You couldn't build a building for that. It's more pictures. And then they just finished the schematic design phase, which has a little more detail. And they have to get approval of those designs before moving into the preliminary design phase, which will create the preliminary drawings, getting much closer to the drawings that a company could go and build a building from. So it is very exciting. You can see the timeline at the bottom. We still have a long way to go, but it definitely, there is movement. So this project was originally approved quite a few years ago, and and it was for a renovation expansion project and not for build a new building. So the budget that is currently in the pool for building this building is not sufficient to actually build the building. And so the budget will be reevaluated with the new scope of the project once the preliminary drawings are submitted. So that's the step in the process where we will get this building kind of revalued for receiving money from the capital pool. So I just wanted to show a couple of the drawings in the most recent renderings that they were sharing with us. Up in the upper left-hand corner, that's kind of like a bird's eye view of what the campus will look like, where there's parking along the front of the building as well as along the side. The big portion that is to the right is the central laboratory, and which is 3 stories tall, and that is connected by some break and administrative areas. And then on the left side, the first floor would be the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, the morgue, the SAP LifeNet functionality. And the second floor of that would be all training. So that is where this body will meet. When we meet in person, once we've moved into that new building, there are lots of training and conference rooms in that left-hand second story. And then on the top of that left hand will be the statewide offices of both the OCME and DFS. And so that will be nice because currently we are in separate buildings across the street to be integrated back in. And then they've started showing us renderings of what the inside would look like. And so this picture is just as you would walk into the front main door and come to a security type vestibule before going into the main lobby. So one of the big things is that, they're trying to use a lot of glass and natural light. And so it's exciting to look at these plans and think about the future. I wanted to just give you an update on where we were with, I had reported before that We had been selected for a OSIG performance audit. So this is the Inspector General for Virginia. And so we were notified in April, but then after we had met with different folks from the OSIG and showed them our computer systems that we use, including our Forensic Advantage system, that tracks all of our casework. They sent a letter saying that they were suspending our performance audit, and the language that they used was that they thought that we would benefit more from a performance audit when OSIG could contract for resources better suited to analyze the technical scientific processes used by DFS. So I guess they realized that they did not have the right expertise to do a meaningful audit, and they would like to kick the can down the road until they were in a place where they could hire an outside contractor to assist. And so with the budget as it is now in Virginia, we're not sure when that might be. So after a 2-year, basically a 2-year process, which is what usually occurs when you need to update regulations, our field test regulations for all drugs, not marijuana, but all drugs that are used in preliminary hearings. These are not field tests where anyone can testify at trial as to the results, but they can be used at preliminary hearings, have been expanded to allow for not just the chemical pouch kits to be approved, but also instruments that can be used in the field, like ones that are based on Raman spectroscopy or other types of testing. And so we have not, they are effective just as of October 1st. So we've not gotten our first request to approve a instrument to do this, but we have been getting questions from law enforcement about whether or not certain mobiles are approved. And so I don't think it will be long before we end up utilizing these regulations. Certainly law enforcement is interested in this due to the fact that many of those chemical pouch kits are no longer being used because of the phenols and lethal powders that are out there. Certainly as a momentous occasion, we have now completed all of the testing and data reviews for all of historical pre-2016 PERCs, or sexual assault kits that were submitted to the laboratory and were on shelves in the custody of law enforcement in Virginia. And so we utilized funds from 2 different grants. You can see here, one's the DANI grant, one is the SACI grant, which was the NIJ grant. The DANI grant, that was for kits that were pre-2014, and then the SACI was for those that were from 2014 to 2016. And the statistics are there. And so we just, with the SACI grant, finished uploading the last of the profiles from those kits. So it is very momentous, and the most important thing I'd like to say is that our staff did a great job with this. They had to do all of this work on overtime. And so we had 35 examiners across the state that worked more than 2,800 hours of overtime to do these reviews of the 2 projects combined. And so that is, over a multiple year period, a lot of overtime. So certainly, thanks to them, and also to Forensic Biology Group Supervisor Teresa Francis, who coordinated both projects and did a great job with all of the I dotting and T crossing that came with handling all of these kits. Now, the beauty of this is the last time I'm going to have to report on this. You will not have to hear about this project anymore. All right, just to give you an update as to where we are with our budget and resources. Since the beginning of COVID, at the beginning of April, we have been under a hiring freeze. All state agencies have been in the executive branch. We do have an exemption, however, for positions that are directly related to public safety. And so our forensic scientist positions, our data bank scientists, our evidence receiving folks are all under this directly related to public safety blanket exemption. And so we have been allowed to continue hiring those positions. So positions that are not included in that are basically administrative type positions and support positions in the laboratory that we have been requesting on a very case-by-case basis because we are less likely to get those approved. We did pledge savings for FY20, which in Virginia, FY20 ended on July 30th of 2020, and now we're in FY21. And so we did give back $300,000 of unspent funds. For our new budget, which Virginia does a 2-year budget, and so the budget is for 21 and 22, which we're already in 21, as I said. These, I don't really have a lot to say about this in general, but I'm going to skip real quick to 2 slides ahead in case you're looking at the PowerPoint online instead of on the screen, to the new budget items that were included in that budget. One was to fund a DNA research postdoc position that's for our biology research grant that we have right now. It's basically authorizing it to spend additional federal dollars, and it gave us 1 full-time equivalent FTE position to be able to fill. So that's kind of a cost neutral thing from a general fund perspective. Our other 2 items were to fund 2 new IT positions that we were originally given, and to fund increased maintenance cost of lab equipment, because we have bought some fairly expensive equipment that has expensive maintenance, such as those Hamilton robots for toxicology and the QTOFs. Both of those, because of changes in the overall economic structure of Virginia post-COVID, initially when the governor put forward changes to the budget to address the expenses from the COVID pandemic, they just unallocated those 2 items. We are currently in Virginia in a special session of our legislation or our legislature, and one of the things is to address the budget. And in both the House and Senate versions, these are not just unallocated, but they have been removed. So it doesn't appear that, you know, it's going to be a while, and we're going to have to put back a request for these later. So we have gotten a little bit of relief from some of the COVID funding. I just went back 1 slide to the COVID-19 funding. We did receive $34,000 of CARES Act, and that was to pay for things like additional cleaning supplies, additional equipment, and that type of thing that we have already spent mostly. And then we also received a new grant through DCJS for the coronavirus emergency supplemental funding. And that is going to be the subject of one of the later talks. So I'm not going to go into that, but it's basically the funding will go for changes in operations for breath alcohol and forensic training. And I'll let them describe what those are. All right, these next grant slides, I'm not the first couple I'm not going to speak to. Those are just ones that we already have that are open and we are still working out of, just for your knowledge. But I'm going to move down to slide 18, which is the first one with the title Status Pending. Just yesterday, we received notification that we did receive the FY20 Paul Coverdell Forensic Science Improvement Grant, which is the formula funding. On the slide, it says it's $225,000. That is half of what the Virginia allotment is under this formula grant. We split this grant 50-50 with the medical examiner. The second one is that we were also informed that we got the CBER funds, which is the funds that are used for DNA. And that is the full amount for Virginia, as we're the only lab in Virginia that is doing DNA testing. So $1.588 million, which is excellent. We had applied for 2 additional grants that are on this slide. One, we applied for some competitive funding under the Coverdell competitive program. We did not get notification about that, which leads me to believe that we are not going to get that. We have not yet heard, and we would not hear directly about the SACI funding. I believe that the OAG is expecting to receive this funding, but we have not gotten a notification. So that is still outstanding. And then on the next slide, there were the 2 research grants that we put forward, one for toxicology and one for firearms and tool marks. We got notification yesterday that we received the grant for the toxicology research, and we did not get a notification either way about the firearms research, which leads me to believe that we probably are not going to receive that one. I think that because all of the other ones came out like right at the same second. Lastly, just to go over the workload statistics, kind of comparing what we were seeing as case submissions in 2019 versus 2020. So the pandemic, we're in a different time. So this is for Q3, which is good gosh, July, August, and September of 2020 combined. And so you can see that we have seen a significant decrease in the amount of drug cases that we are receiving, negative 23%, which that has been the case across the entire time period since April. March was pretty much the same for most, but you can see that that the department is overall down 8%, but that is really driven by that reduction in controlled substances cases or drug cases. We are definitely seeing an increase in toxicology cases, firearms and tool marks, and also in forensic biology. These changes to submissions have made it so that in particular, our controlled substances backlog, with all of the things that we had in place trying to reduce the turnaround times in that section, along with the large reduction in submissions, has made it so that we have been able to get our backlog down significantly since 2019. You can see it's a 65% decrease, which is amazing. And we actually are going to have, because we are staffed at a capacity to do more drug cases now than are coming in the door. Once we get to where all of our drug sections are totally caught up, we are going to maintain that capacity, because I believe it will come back, the need for it, and have those folks help in other places in the lab, especially areas where the submissions have increased instead of decreased. So this just shows our average turnaround times for cases that were completed in September. You can see drugs there is 58 days, which we were over 100. We were up at 140 days not that long ago. So the ones that are going up, firearms, it has definitely been going up. Latent prints was going up and it just went down a little. And so hopefully we are starting to catch up. But you will hear in presentations after mine kind of some of the staffing issues of where we are. And then I'm not going to go through all these, but this just shows, each of these shows the quarterly trends of each of the sections with cases completed, cases received, caseload or what the backlog was at the end of that time period, and that average days that cases were in the system that were worked in that quarter. And so you can definitely see that that there are some good trends and some not so good trends, depending on which ones you focus on. So I appreciate it, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody might have.
All righty. Any questions for Linda? All right. If there's no questions, I guess we can go ahead with the presentations for the Division of Technical Services. And we'll start with Dr. Hutchins on the toxicology.
All right, thank you, everybody. Sabrina, can you go to the next slide? Next one, there we go. The first thing I want to address is that we were able to participate in the National Governors Association Learning Collaborative on state strategies to strengthen and leverage data to address impaired driving. Long title for saying that we as a group within Virginia have a team of different agencies, represented by DFS, motor vehicles, state police, there's the chief data officer and the governor's office, all working together to kind of address impaired driving, to be able to share data across agencies better, and the idea that it would help us give a better understanding of the scope of impaired driving impacts and understand what is effective for enforcement, where is enforcement going to happen. And this is something that we've learned with the other states that are participating in this program. There's 10 other states. Especially from Colorado, it's really important to have a good understanding of the scope of your impaired driving issue prior to any decriminalization or legalization of marijuana, so you have a better understanding of the impacts of those. So that's why we're looking at this issue closely. Next slide, please. This year, the Society of Forensic Toxicologists annual meeting, I think I had mentioned this last time, was canceled for the in-person meeting, but during September, they put on what they call Softember. It was all an online format. We were able to have actually 3 of our people present at this program, one addressing fluoperazole, another looking at atomoxetine, and another looking at the stop testing program in DUIs here in Virginia. And we were also able to have 37 of our staff attend, and we have about 41 people total. So we're actually able to get a good number of our staff to get a great amount of continuing education hours. Also wanted to update you on the Hamilton Automated Liquid Handling System. This has been implemented in the Central Toxicology Lab. The other laboratories are currently working on their verifications. And as we go through this, just like anything else, as we put it into production, we're noticing minor methodology fixes. Something as simple as moving the pipette tips up millimeters. And it's not anything big, not anything that's going to change anything from the validations. Next slide, please. This is the slide that is going to address those methods that were sent out to the subcommittee members. So the recently validated methods are the fentanyl derivatives quantitation by solid phase extraction and the fentanyl derivatives qualitative analysis by solid phase extraction. These 2 methods, the quantitation is just putting it onto a solid phase extraction platform to be able to utilize it with the automated liquid handling system. And the derivatives qualitative version is adding on another set of fentanyl derivatives to the previously validated qualitative analysis. Do the subcommittee members want to address any comments at this time?
Yeah, this is Les. Can you hear me? Just to make sure.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, just a couple brief comments on the documents that were sent out. And like I said, I didn't see the need for a whole meeting. In the doc, you have a retention time window of 5%. When you're doing a lot of compounds like that, that's a pretty liberal window. I think 2% is probably more accepted in that world. However, if you feel that you have good stability, that's fine, but I think it'd be useful to collect the data from like one column change to the next and note when you make mobile phase changes to see how a couple markers are marker compounds, if you don't want to watch all of them, to make sure they don't drift, because there's a lot of common fragments within that group, just to be sure.
Okay.
The other
definitely.
thing on the interferences, there is a known interference from hydroxybupropion and a couple other metabolites. It's a pretty widely prescribed drug. I didn't see it on the interference list. At least hydroxybupropion I would take a look at.
Hydroxybupropion, is that a parent compound or is that a metabolite of bupropion?
It's a metabolite. It has
Okay.
several. Hydroxy is the one we've seen more issues with. On the stability, just so I'm clear, that is extracted sample stability. That's not actually stability in matrix, correct?
Correct. That's extracted. The concept is you're simulating, putting it on the instrument. Instrument fails halfway through the run over the weekend, and you have to come back to restart the analysis.
So we actually have no idea how stable they are in matrix.
No, we didn't test that one out. That one is a wholly different type of stability study we'd have to do.
Yeah, with these compounds, and since people are looking for them, and a lot of work is done either when you write the SOP or if it's written, I would put a bold that the kind of stability this is. People see stability and they think sample stability, not extracted sample stability. That's usually a minor stability that you worry about, because you figure once you put it on the instrument, it's off in 24 hours. You're not concerned about it. So whether you feel it's necessary or not, I don't know what's the lag time, 30 days before you may get to them. I think it'd be interesting at least to do some preliminary studies, because to send out negatives when the compounds aren't stable is kind of misleading. And since we don't have the data and you're claiming stability, be clear about the stability you're claiming. And I think it would be useful to at least the more prevalent compounds to check for some limited stability.
Definitely, I understand the making it clear. I believe within our procedures manual, we do make it very clear on the sample stability that it is extracted. And it's usually within our comments and quality control section of each method that we address it in. And as far as preliminary studies on the matrix, we can, we can't really control how long the samples sit. So it's something that we could, like you said, we could possibly do a preliminary study on it. But that's just something that we can try to do that as a research project. But then also going back to the retention time, we have also implemented for these type of compounds specifically, looking at the relative retention time. And that helps us to narrow it down much more, as far as, because there's the ones I can think of off the top of my head is the ortho meta para, was it FBF and FIBF?
Yes.
Can't remember the full name, but yeah, they all come out as basically a quadruple peak, type of thing. So we, narrow it down on those ones. So we're really looking at that one.
Yeah, I think it's useful because if you to risk manage this particular assay, because there are common fragments, common backbone structures, while not necessarily isobarics, you don't want into calling something one thing and it turns out to be another, because you had some retention time drift. And 5%, typical old HPLC without mass spec, but as we've added more compounds like these assays, we tend to want to tighten up the windows, and you just don't want to be caught with a liberal acceptance criteria on something like this.
Correct. And that's something we've talked about over the years, and just trying to get the change implemented, collecting more data to make it justified, and we're getting there.
Okay. I have one other question, and it's more of a general question.
relating to the minutes from the previous meeting, we had sort of put forth some action items such as following up with the true limits of detection for the assays that we noted. I don't know if you're going to cover that in a slide. If that has been done and when we could expect the data to support the actions that we requested.
We haven't done that yet, and we're not going to address it in this one. We are looking to add that into some, validations in the future. These two validations that we have here were pretty much complete right at the end of the last meeting. So, it's kind of hard to add those in since we had already completed those. We've also gone around and changed the definition we're using for LOD within the validation summaries to make sure it's indicative that those are just administratively decided cutoffs. So it's not saying, clearly it's the limited detection, making sure it's much more clear that this is, a chosen level that is our cutoff level. And within our procedures manual, we've also gone around and changed from using the terminology of LOD to using the terminology of threshold control. It's saying here's the threshold of, report it positive or report it negative, or not report it.
Things like this slip through the crack as we move on down the road of life. And we only meet every 6 months with this committee. I think it would be useful to have it as an action item by next meeting that the data is brought back and we can close it up if.
Okay, we can add that to the list.
Because right now they're open action items that weren't included as old business and perhaps they should have been, but just to make sure it doesn't fall through the cracks.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from other members of the subcommittee?
None for me.
All right. Okay. Moving on, we've also recently added two methods to our, previous slide, Sabrina. Previously added methods that we've validated to our procedures manual are the GHB analysis and also the fentanyl derivatives quantitation. Some future methods we're looking at in our research is looking at moving our barbiturates method from GC mass spec to the LC tandem mass spec. There's also a miscellaneous base drugs quantitation. These kind of catch up some of the more difficult drugs to analyze by GC mass spec. We're also looking at doing a quantitation of fluelprazolam using our currently validated benzodiazepine methods. It's just adding that as a quantitation instead of a qualitative analysis. And then also in relation to the grant that Director Jackson referenced from the NIJ, we're looking at doing cannabinoids by LC tandem mass spec. And that's really just updating our current methodology from liquid extraction towards a solid phase extraction, which we can hopefully move over to automation. All right, next slide. Some interesting statistics, as Director Jackson referenced, we do have an increase in the toxicology section as far as submissions and backlog. It's really interesting because during the pandemic, the vehicle miles traveled has really reduced. However, if you look at the first half of our year of 2020 versus 2019, you can see that the DUI and DUID categories, so alcohol impaired driving and drug impaired driving cases, are all up quite a bit. Submissions for blood draws. And then you see with the OCME, we also have an increase of about 12%. Toxicology other is kind of a, sort of our catch-all for other types of drug facilitated crimes. Next slide, please. Staffing wise, here in the toxicology section, we did have the recent retirement of Terry England. She was worked here with the state for about 40 years. We've also had some recent new hires. We hired a forensic toxicologist in the Roanoke lab, a forensic scientist here in the central laboratory, and starting, I think, about next week or maybe within the next 2 weeks, a new forensic scientist up in our northern toxicology lab. We currently have one open position for a forensic scientist and recruit in the central tox lab, and one of our grant FLS positions in recruit in our northern lab. And then we also have one vacant FLS position in the central laboratory. Breath alcohol has been fully staffed and pretty stable for the last few years. All right, next slide, please. Breath alcohol, we're continuing to utilize the online recertification. This has been really successful for us during the pandemic as we're able to get more officers to utilize this platform to avoid having to come into in-person trainings. And then we also were able to resume our in-person training in June. We had our first initial operator class conducted in late June. We limited our class size to 15 students. That allows us to maintain that social distancing of 6 feet, and also to provide the most number of students and have one DFS instructor and one law enforcement instructor as well. We've also resumed in-person recertification courses in some locations. With the decreased class size, though, we've also had to increase the number of classes we offer, but by increasing the number of classes, we're actually able to catch up to all of the trained officers we need to train for the year. Next slide, please. We also look at a couple of grants we've received recently. We received the DMV Highway Safety Office grant provided through NHTSA. This is the one that provides us the funding to provide all of our trainings for our law enforcement operators. It also helps us to retain one of our forensic scientists. We were also able to get that DCJS coronavirus grant that Director Jackson referred to. This one allows us to have better continuity of operations during pandemics and closures. So the idea being that we would move towards more of a paperless format, utilizing mobile phones as scanning devices and mobile hotspots, and be able to utilize our work computers to be able to do basically all the functions of the job you need to do while you're on the road. If for some reason, say the Richmond laboratory was closed, or there's the pandemic and an outbreak and we all have to be out of the office. It's the idea of moving towards that to allow us to have that better continuity of operations. Next slide, please. And the instrument enhancement project is still ongoing. We've completed testing the instrument. Now we're testing the database functionality to ensure that the data downloads to our website correctly with the new software. Next slide. Interestingly, comparing the breath alcohol statistics to our blood toxicology statistics, January and February of 2020, we're actually on track to have a comparable number of breath tests, and we're actually maybe up slightly. However, once the pandemic hit, you can see the numbers of breath tests decreased dramatically in March, April, even further. They've started to creep back up, but we're still down about 19% for all breath tests, which is kind of an interesting comparison between your breath analysis versus your blood analysis being up about about 20%. So, and this is actually noted from a few other sources in other states that alcohol impaired driving appears to be down during the pandemic. However, drug impaired driving actually is appearing to be up in many states. So it's not sure why or what the reason is, but it is what it is. So, and I believe that is my last slide. And moving on to Robin Weimer. Thank you, everybody. I do have to leave here in a few minutes for a different meeting. However, if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to email me or let Ms. Lohman know. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Robin Weimer. I'm going to be talking to you about the chemistry program update. We're going to start with trace evidence and then move on to controlled substances afterwards. So looking at trace evidence trainees, we have one active trainee working on fiber training, expected to complete their training in April 2021, and that's in the central laboratory. We did have another trainee who started in March of 2020 on tape training, but they are currently, their tape training has been put on hold due to staff coverage. We've had some absences due to medical reasons, and so we needed to maintain our ability in current backlog levels. So that person has been taken off of tape training for now. As for section training in trace evidence, all of the trace evidence staff was able to gather together in January of 2020, but we were also able to take advantage of free online symposium that was held in late July. This was focused on the current trends in forensic trace analysis. It was hosted by the Center of Forensic Science Research and Education, or CFSRE. This provided 15 hours of trace evidence training. It didn't cover all the subdisciplines that we do in trace evidence, but it did cover primer residue, paint, glass, and tape. There were some technical difficulties, but otherwise it was very well received. One of the biggest changes that we'll be making for trace evidence is the implementation of assessments of significance into report conclusions. That's going to be happening this month. We're currently in the approval process right now, and this is going to be applicable to all trace evidence examinations that involve a comparison. We've already incorporated this into trainings, making sure our customers know, for example, Forensic Academy, as well as several fire investigator trainings. Another impact that we've had recently in casework is that we've noticed an increase in juvenile rush primer residue cases. These cases are rushed because as juveniles are held, their court dates come a lot faster. Just from an article in the recent paper in the Richmond Times Dispatch from October 4th, they were talking about a wave of violence really focused in the past 2 months. So I looked at some data and compared the percent of juvenile cases in primer residue completed cases from 2019, comparing that to 2020. I compared the time from March 1st to September 30th. This would cover COVID time frame, but also the summer months as well. And we've seen a 40% increase in that percent of juvenile cases and the overall number of primer residue cases completed. Looking at the number of juvenile primer residue cases submitted in the last 2 months, which was the previous article was focusing on the past 2 months. In August and September of 2019, there were 0 juvenile primer residue cases, whereas in that same time frame in 2020, there were 7, which will make a large increase, cause that large increase for that percent of juvenile cases. Now, these cases tend to have multiple suspects, which is a longer analysis time, and that can impact other cases and the turnaround time for those. So that's going to affect other primer residue cases as well as instrument support cases where we provide instrumental data from the scanning electron microscope to other cases such as paint cases or other general chemical cases. Moving on to controlled substances, we have 1 active trainee in our Western laboratory that's expected to complete their training in April of 2021. We have had 2 recent completion of training, 1 in our Northern laboratory in July and another in our Eastern laboratory in August. And we have 1 position in recruitment in our Northern laboratory. For section training, we were hoping to gather, rather than gathering, we were hoping to take advantage of a free online symposium, again hosted by CFSRE, focused on the current trends in seized drug analysis. This was supposed to be in October 2020. But has been postponed to early 2021. So we'll revisit this opportunity for potential training next year. We were able to, however, substitute the Southwestern Association of Forensic Scientists, or SWAF's annual meeting. This was also an online meeting, but it was hosted by the Forensic Technology Center of Excellence. This provided about 8 hours over the last week in October and was specific to controlled substances. The department continues to recommend compounds to the Board of Pharmacy for expedited scheduling. In July, there were 13 compounds that were recommended and were considered at the September 9th meeting, and they are still pending final approval. Those include 7 research chemicals, 2 synthetic opioids, and 4 cannabinoid agents. And then for addressing cannabis, given that things continually seem to be changing, we just finished our validation of a semi-quantitative method for non-plant material matrices with THC. These are going to be the waxes and oils, for example. And our next step there is incorporation into the SOP. We also have been working on method development and validation for a full quantitation of THC via gas chromatography mass spectrometry in selected ion monitoring modes. So the Controlled Substances Subcommittee can look forward to more documents to review in the future. Thank you for your time.
Hello, I am Sabrina Sillison. I'm a Physical Evidence Program Manager. We're going to do an update on physical evidence sections. Latent prints and impressions is first. In training, we actually have 2 in Central, not 1. One just came back from leave and should be finishing up by the end of the year, and another just started, so they will finish next year. And we have 1 in Western that just started yesterday. as well as one that is finishing up out there as well. So we have actually 2 in training in Central and 2 in training in Western. We were able to have a majority of our staff attend the Chesapeake Bay Division IAI online training. It was 16 hours. The group put together some quality speakers for the event, and there's a list of them. Everyone can see the impact of COVID. I think that was interesting, seeing how people are teleworking, what systems they're using. We were lucky here because we were able to do the video and they could work from home in various locations. They talked about human remains recovery, understanding exclusions, which still confound us sometimes. It's easier to identify something than it is to exclude it. Technology transfers and reconstruction of vehicle accidents. Feedback from the comparative science community of what educational needs for the next generation. They did some UV photography, features of friction ridge, discriminating power, and biological limitations. The permanence of friction ridge skin, as well as complete latent print examinations and APHIS. So there was a wide variety of material presented. We got good feedback from our examiners that did attend. On to firearms and tool marks. We have 1 in recruit in Western. I do believe they should be setting up interviews soon. In training, we have 2 in Central and 1 in Eastern, and there's also 1 in Northern. The person in Eastern and Northern started at the same time, so we're hoping to combine some training as we move forward, but they won't be done until late next year. We are continuing with our validation or verification of the Cadre 3D scanner equipment. We completed the equipment verification, and we did find that the different gels, this is the where the cartridge case is pushed up into a thin gel material and creates a 3D image. We did find that when you have different gels, when you change out the gels, it does impact the measurements. The user didn't impact the measurement, the time of day didn't impact the measurement, but we did find the different gels impacted it. But it was still within the acceptable range established by the vendor. We have, as we've gone through this equipment verification and now collecting the sample sets from the CTS test and the consecutively manufactured slides, the instrument is not as hands-off as we first thought. It does take some maintenance of the person sitting there doing it. You can't just load on the samples and walk away, kind of like you can with a GC mass spec, which we kind of thought it was. So it's been a good learning experience, and this was the grant that we have not heard if we got yet, but it doesn't look good for us. So we will continue with our scanner as we have and hopefully implement it and keep moving forward with 3D imaging. We had the joy of evaluating our uncertainty of measurement for distance determination after our assessment. We did evaluate it across the state. We did 3 measurements at various distances done by each examiner so we could get the multiple uncertainty components addressed of time of day, people, environment. We were assessing or evaluating the recording of the measurement from the muzzle to the target, not the setup of the experiment or the comparison of the patterns. It was an evaluation of the measurement. The largest variation we saw was at 23 inches, and it was less than 1 inch. And we have chosen not to report that. It was evaluated, and we can conclude it would not impact the interpretation done by the customer. We have our ATF minimum requirement operating standards. This is associated with our NIBIN equipment. The ATF has put out these last year. They came and inspected each of our facilities. They've also pulled data recently to see if we've improved in our turnaround times and our entry times. And they are requiring that people meet the criteria by December 30th, 2020. They also instituted an online recertification test for all users. Feedback was it took approximately 25 minutes, was easy to do on their learning center. We have new systems being added in the Commonwealth. Richmond PD acquired a system, as well as Norfolk PD. Newport News, Hampton has had their system for several years. These agencies, when they acquire the system, the ATF conducts their correlation reviews and reports their associations. They're a little different animal than we are, but it kind of affects our reporting to our customers as well. DME, we are fully staffed in that section. We are now completing some cross-training. One of our examiners was competent in mobile, and now she's training in computer. Another one was competent in computer. Now she's training in mobile. So we do have 2 people in training, but we are fully staffed. But as a result of that, their backlog has been greatly reduced. They've also updated some SOPs to improve their turnaround times by implementing a window of exam related to date and time filters in order to reduce the amount of data they're looking at that they're going to return to the agency. Another result of being fully staffed, there is a wide variety of knowledge now in the section, and they have enhanced their capabilities with their existing equipment and methods. So they can quickly identify components of an iPhone that are damaged that prevent it from charging so that they can acquire the needed data. They've looked at different databases where web browser information is stored, and generally it's not supported by analytical forensic analysis software, so they're able to now do a more manual exam of that type of data. They can now analyze iPhone logs to document the application usage activity. And this is useful for applications that are uninstalled by the user in an attempt to remove user activity, so nefarious activity. They now have the ability to analyze Microsoft Windows, your phone application, which is used to pair your phone with your Windows 10 computer. So you can send messages, make calls with the device via the computer. So this can help understand where the data is. They can now identify SQLite databases that contain complex data structures that require more in-depth analysis than typically required. So they're doing a lot of database, a lot of innovative new capabilities within the section. They're also researching into methods and processes to identify manipulated videos, recordings, and still images. So that's ongoing research into improving those methods. And that's all I have for physical evidence. Alka's going to talk about biology now.
Good morning, everyone. Brad Jenkins was unable to join us this morning, so clearly I am not Brad Jenkins, but I will be speaking on his behalf. As far as forensic biology staffing goes, we do have 1 in training in casework. We do have 1 in training in the data bank. We have a recent vacancy in the data bank as well, so we will get that posted. Casework in Western has 1 training, and the individual in Northern just started yesterday, so we're pretty excited about that. She's come to us from Louisiana, and Eastern is fully staffed. We do have some additional training with our examiners for YSTR. Western is already online, as is Eastern. As far as the STR mixed deployment goes, the training for that first set of examiners is ongoing. And we do have an external virtual training at the end of the month scheduled for 8 examiners. The validation update for the STAR mix is currently being reviewed, and the regional lab performance checks are nearing completion, so we're very excited about that. We also have the new real-time PCR instruments in-house, and those are in the process of being validated. And so as you can see, we have a new DNA quantitation kit that goes with it. It would require a new YSTR kit evaluation, as well as additional casework direct studies. The DNA research grant, which deals with, excuse me one second, I'm pressing buttons on 2 computers and I didn't press it on the right one. The DNA research grant, which deals with the automated or semi-automated differential extraction method, is still in process. We are reposting the research position, and we will most likely repost it in the near future in hopes to get a little, to widen our applicant pool and hopefully fill that pretty quickly. As far as the continuing education and external training for our DNA examiners, we were able to have them all attend the ProMega meeting remotely or virtually during the month of September. Again, we have those 8 examiners that will receive the remote or virtual STAR Mix training at the end of this month, October. And for the national the national CODIS meeting, which will be in December for state and local administrators. That will be virtual, so our folks will attend that as well. We're pleased to report that the new QAS standards that were effective July 1, we are in compliance with. Our manuals have been edited, published, and we've been working under those for a few months now. We are also excited to report that our external audit to the new QAS is scheduled for the first week of December, And so we appreciate our regional auditing group and the members that are coming to assist us with that. The data bank has the pre-log electronic portal project that is still ongoing, and that is for the sample information and pre-submission data so that we can be sure that we have everybody that's supposed to be in there and we don't have duplicate information. And that staging environment testing is the next phase of this project. We are expected to begin that before the end of 2020, the end of this calendar year. We have been working with the Department of Corrections so that we can make sure that we have an automated data exchange within the software. And this will replace our current tracking system, which is outside of our control. But so we're hoping if we can bring it in-house, we can have a more efficient workflow. I could not have gotten through those DNA slides any faster, but are there any questions for Brad? And I will be happy to make him answer those. Hearing none, I will go on and give you just the catch-all rest of the Division of Technical Services update. As far as staffing within DTS proper goes, we do have the QTalk automation grant that is with Dr. Wagner's laboratory, where it was initially for a postdoctoral fellow. It then became a research specialist position to widen the applicant pool. That new employee began in August. Their training is complete, and I'm happy to report that that project is progressing. I'm also pleased to inform you that as far as our accreditation goes, we were notified just a couple weeks ago on September 25th of our successful completion and transition to the latest ISO 17025 standard, as well as the latest accreditation requirements from ANAB for both testing and calibration. The final step of that is just to review our new scopes of accreditation, which I just received a draft earlier this morning, and then those will be published, and you won't hear about this again until May, which is just around the corner. The Forensic Training Academy, as you'll recall, last time we spoke, the 100th FSA had completed. We were fortunate to get them done prior to COVID closing everything down, and we did delay the initial 101st Academy, which is now the 101st Academy, which began in September. They are set to graduate November 13th. We are looking at ways to have a virtual ceremony for them, but you would have seen them milling around if you were on site, but it's a virtual meeting, so we'll see them milling around since we're on site. We appreciate the funding that we received from DCJS, the Department of Criminal Justice Services, to maintain our part-time forensic trainer position. So that position assists with us running 3 academies as well as different short courses throughout the year. We do have 3 Forensic Science Academy sessions planned for 2021. We did receive word that we have received coronavirus emergency supplemental funding also for that grant through DCJS. Dr. Hutchins spoke more about that earlier. And so that is just to ensure continuity of operations and the safety of both our staff and students for breath alcohol and forensic training courses. And as Jim already said, we would move towards paperless instrument certifications for breath alcohol and add additional capacity for online course delivery. We also wanted to just touch base about the organization of scientific area committees, since we have now begun what they are referring to as OSAC 2.0. You'll remember in the original OSAC, we had several DFS staff that were serving on those committees. We still have, as you can see, folks on those committees. For ignitable liquids, explosives, and gunshot residue, Brenda Christie from Eastern Trace is the chair. We also have Mary Kean, who's a central trace examiner on that committee. For forensic toxicology, Dr. Rebecca Wagner, our chemistry research section supervisor, serves on that committee. We do have several affiliate members on the various committees as well, and we do have some that are also just serving in some advisory roles. In addition, we do have several staff who have submitted applications to be considered for spots on the OSAC 2.0. As far as new standards being developed goes, we are an active organizational member of the ASTM 30 Committee on Forensic Science. So we actively review those documents, provide comments, and vote whenever things are balloted. We, as an agency, have elected to be sure that we are reviewing and providing input on set standards that are developed by the AFB. We certainly want to review those standards, comment, and as they're published, adhere to them in as much as we can. And if there are reasons that we're not, we would be able to articulate why, whether it's a methodology reason or something else. Not sure how many folks are familiar with OIML, but that's the International Organization of Legal Metrology. And since it's French, the letters are in a different order when we call it the English name. But there is the recommendation on breath alcohol analyzers, the R126. They have updated that throughout the years, but there is currently a draft out for comment, and Jenny Duffy is the IACT, which is the International Association for Chemical Testing representative, and she is our breath alcohol section supervisor. So back before COVID, she would go to Europe and comment on the different standards because, again, it's a French organization and that's where the meetings were. They continue to meet virtually and hopefully we'll be able to agree to the next revision and publish the next R126 pretty soon, but those usually, there's a lot of discussion, so it usually takes a little bit of time. That is all that we have for the Division of Technical Services update. So if there are any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Alrighty, thank you all for that presentation, those presentations. I guess before we move on, we need to address the issue of the toxicology report. And so since the subcommittee did not meet per se, our intention, as you can see, the agenda was to close the recommend closing the report review, which I think we still can do. I would like to ask for motion to close the review of the validation, that the department will consider the comments that were presented as part of that. And then I'm not sure how to handle the follow-up from the last meeting, if we want to make that an action item for the department or how we would handle that. Can you provide some guidance, Ms. Herndon?
Yeah, I think that you could, if you want to close the review and the department to consider the comments from Dr. Edinburgh, and then ask the department report back on it at the the next meeting.
Okay. All right, so I will do that. So I'll ask for a motion to close the review, and and as part of that motion to close review, the review being closed, the department will report back on the questions and the previous comments from the last review.
This is Les Edinburgh, so moved.
And a second.
This is Jamie St. Clair, second.
Alrighty. Ms. Taylor, can you please take a roll call vote?
Okay, before I start the roll, I just wanted to make sure that Maureen Bottrell, is she still on?
I am.
Okay, yes. Thank you. I'm going to start the roll now.
Jennifer, before we
Yeah.
start, I want to clarify for as a committee member. So the comments and the recommendations from the subcommittee, are they just that? Or is when we ask for response back, is it okay if they say we have considered it but decided not to take action? Or is it are our recommendations considered to be action items?
This is Les. My comments for today would be considered more recommendations. The previous meeting we had, those items pertaining to the limit of detection, I think were requirements because of the way that the studies were conducted or not conducted. My opinion on that.
Okay, I was looking back at the meeting minutes and I did see that they were presented as recommendations. So that's just why I wanted to know if they how that was to be approached.
I think it's a very valid question because I think in the past we hadn't really sorted out a recommendation versus an action item, and I think that's a good distinction to make. We've always used the word recommendation regardless, but I think it still deserves a response. No, we're not going to. Yes, we are. Or we decide that we really want this. This is important to ensure that we're managing the methods and the risk of the testing. Katja?
I agree. I just wanted maybe Linda to kind of fill us in on what the expectation would be for the division.
Yeah, it has always been my understanding that they are recommendations. I do think that it makes good sense that we would come back and readdress those recommendations, whether we have done additional testing and we have added that to our validation documentation, or we have thought about, maybe we have addressed it in a way, I gave an example of changed the language of how we're speaking about the validation and how we're speaking about the method. Maybe the risk is managed in that way. But whatever it is, it does mean that we would come back in the next meeting and express, what we have done with those recommendations.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I will start the roll now. Mr. Beatty?
Aye.
Ms. Bottrell?
Aye.
Dr. Corrado?
Aye.
Dr.
Aye.
Cotton? Dr. Edinburgh?
Mute. Aye.
Thank you. Director Jackson?
Aye.
Dr. Maha?
Aye.
Mr. Myers? Ms. Shelley?
Aye.
Ms. St. Clair?
Aye.
Mr. Xerxes?
Aye.
The motion passes.
Alrighty, thank you. All right, the next item is our old business, and I'd like to call on Ms. Jenkins to report on the microscopic hair comparison case review.
Sure. Rich, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. So going back to our prior meeting, you all might recall that the review team had considered approximately 9 transcripts and we were waiting on setting up a meeting for the subcommittee of the Forensic Science Board to consider their recommendations and make determinations on what notifications would be made. On September 2nd, rather, they considered those 9 transcripts and the recommendations of the review team, and they approved 4 of those transcripts for notification. We got the notification letters out to the prosecutors and law enforcement. The 2 of the defendants are deceased, and 2 of the defendants we are working on locating. One had a very common name, and we have no identifying information. So we've asked law enforcement to assist us with trying to determine whether or not that individual was actually convicted or not, because we're not even able to ascertain that from the clerk's office without more information. And then one we're just trying to determine where that individual might be located because they're no longer incarcerated. So we will continue through the winter to look for transcripts, and we'll hopefully set up another review team meeting in the spring to consider another set at that point in time. And that's where we are. I can answer any questions anyone might have.
Alrighty.
It might be just me, but Rich seems frozen.
No, I agree. He looks frozen.
All right, I just texted him.
Job freeze going on. We talked about that.
Linda, while we're waiting, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I had one about your presentation. With the reducing backlog, are you also seeing a reduction in court time that your technicians are spending? Is that helping?
Yes. There was a judicial emergency that has been in place since very early on in the pandemic, which for a while completely halted all court, except for, just the very, very seldom odd thing. And so, especially in toxicology and drug chemistry, where they go more often, it was beneficial just being in the lab more. It started to open back up now, and so people are starting to drive to testify, especially in those disciplines, more often. We still have just a few jurisdictions in Virginia that have reopened for jury trials, and so some of the other disciplines like forensic biology are still not going very often because of that limitation. And so we, one of the things in the judicial emergency was, you guys court systems should consider video testimony, and we've had that available all along with very little interest coming from the parties and the court. So we still have not gotten a lot of interest, but we are ready whenever anyone is willing to try it.
All right. Yeah, for our people, we've been fairly lucky in getting video testimony done. So I was just curious where you were with that.
Yeah, and I think they have been using video for having the defendant not having to travel to court. So having the defendant do video from the jail or what have you. And so Amy has reminded us that they may not have multiple lines to where they can have multiple different people using their equipment at the same time, and that we may be limited by that as well.
Thank you.
Linda, another question since Jim left. We've experienced the inability to get Hamilton tips. Have you had that? Because the Hamiltons are going to COVID testing, and we use a prodigious amount of them. We're on restriction and looking at tips from other manufacturers from China. We in a bit of a crisis situation as far as getting testing done. You haven't had anything like that said to you by Hamilton?
Not that I have heard of, but I think we are a much lower volume. I mean, because we only have the method online in one location, and it's only for, one method. And so I don't think we're using them in that big a volume. I know that across the street, DCLS has had, we've been requested if we have certain pipette tips where they were having a shortage and we're worried about getting the pipette tips that they needed. They're the ones that are doing the health department COVID testing, and they were running short. They use for, that's obviously for DNA related testing, not tox related testing, but pipette tips or pipette tips. Can't talk. Good grief. But mainly it seemed that they were having shortages with the long tips that we don't use at all. They didn't have a shortage of the standard length tips. And I haven't heard that we've had an issue. And if Alka's on, maybe she can add to that if she knows more.
Yeah, well, we've had trouble with all tips, and it's just because of the volume we've used. And within the organization, Tox is giving up tips to COVID so they can keep testing. And we are such a black hole. We've been sucking in other people's allotments. Of course, they're going to the lower volume users and pushing things to the higher volume users. I just didn't know where that might put you. If it happened, were you prepared to go back to manual methods, or are you just stuck until it gets sorted out?
We are definitely not stuck. We could easily go back to manual methods.
Okay.
Yes, and Dr. Edinburgh, this is Alka. We were able to stock up on tips, so we have about a year's worth for the Hamilton.
Oh, do you want to sell some?
How much money do you have?
Okay, well, that's good. I was just sitting here approving validations of new tips, new suppliers, and it just occurred to me, I wonder where you guys are sitting in tip supply. But you guys are good. That's good.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Yeah, I bet our year's worth wouldn't get you very far.
Any port in a storm, Linda, but let's move on. I think Rich is back. No? Okay.
He texted and said he was back on.
I saw his phone number pop up.
Rich?
Mute? Double mute? Because there's a meeting mute and then there's a phone mute.
Looks like he's trying to text me. Hold on. He is not showing that he's muted. Do you have to do the *6? Is that a thing on this system?
Yeah, because it automatically mutes you when you dial in, but you have to do *6 even if you take your phone off of mute. That's why you couldn't hear me initially, even though I switched to the phone.
Okay,
How's that?
Perfect.
There you go.
Okay. Alrighty, that takes care of this. So I'm back on by my phone, on my computer. Alrighty. Control. All right, so where have we gone? Since I lost everybody. The next agenda. Are we still at the agenda? I mean the meeting dates for 2021.
Yes, we are.
Okay. Okay. What did you decide while I was away?
We talked about different things.
I see. Pipette tips and all that. Yeah, I heard. All right. So we can go forward then with the. Sorry, I apologize for that. Go forward with the 2021 meeting dates.
Okay, so we have two potential options for April of 2021, and then just one option in October of 2021. For April, we have the week of the 19th through the 23rd, with the meeting being on Tuesday, April 20th. And then we also have the week of the 26th through the 30th, with the meeting being on Tuesday, the 27th. For October, we have the week of the 11th through the 15th, with the meeting being on Wednesday, October 13th, because Columbus Day is on that Monday, the 11th.
What was the second option in April, the second week?
The 26th through the 30th, with the meeting
okay.
being on Tuesday, the 27th.
It's not all about me, but that's a better week for me. The week of the 20th, right? Or the meeting on the 22nd.
Yeah, my calendar is completely free for anything at this point. Alrighty, so Tuesday the 27th of April.
The 27th?
Is that what you said? Or the 20th?
I thought we were talking 22nd, the 27th.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, okay, let's, so it's either the 20th or the 27th. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
the 20th is okay with me. The 27th is least preferred, but I can manage it.
Alrighty. So we can propose the 20th? April 20th.
Do we need a motion for that, or is it just the dates?
I don't think that you all typically do a motion on it. I think that you just select the meeting date that seems to best accommodate everyone's schedules.
Yeah.
And will that encompass the total FSB date as well? That same Tuesday, Wednesday time frame? Is that what we usually shoot for?
That's correct. We typically hold the Forensic Science Board meeting the day following the SAC on the
Perfect.
2 times that they meet together.
Perfect. Okay.
All right, so we're looking at April 20th. And October
13th.
What was the date? October 13th, the Wednesday. So Wednesday, Thursday because of the holiday. Okay. All right, April 20th and October 13th. All right, so I guess we'll just propose those dates, put them down. Hearing no great dissension among the meeting attendees. Okay. Alrighty. So I guess we'll pencil them in April 20th, and we'll decide on those dates, April 20th and October 13th, hearing no comments regarding those two dates. And then we'll move on to public comments. Is there any public comments for this meeting? Alrighty, hearing none. That concludes our agenda. So I will ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
This is Les, so moved.
Ken Xerxes, second.
All right, Ms. Taylor, can you please take the roll call vote?
Okay, Mr. Beatty,
Aye.
Ms. Bottrell,
Aye.
Dr. Corrado,
Aye.
Dr. Cotton,
Aye.
Dr. Edinburgh,
Aye.
Director Jackson,
Aye.
Dr. Maha,
Aye.
Mr. Myers,
Aye.
Ms. Shelley,
Aye.
Ms. St. Clair,
Aye.
Mr. Xerxes.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Alrighty, thank you, Ms. Taylor. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone.